Robert had been the CEO of his tech company for nearly 12 years now. He'd seen employees come and go, witnessed countless personal dramas from a distance, and always maintained what he called a healthy professional boundary. But something about the woman in the software development department had been bothering him for weeks now, and he couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Her name was Jennifer, and 3 months ago, she'd been one of those employees who lit up the office. Always quick with a smile, always willing to help a colleague debug their code. Always staying late not because she had to, but because she genuinely loved what she did. Robert remembered her laugh echoing down the hallways during lunch breaks. Remembered how she'd organized that charity fundraiser that brought the whole company together. But that version of Jennifer seemed like a distant memory now. The change had been gradual at first. A little less energy in her morning greetings, slightly darker circles under her eyes. Then it became more obvious. Robert had walked past her desk one Tuesday afternoon and found her fast asleep.
Wow.
Her head resting on her folded arms, her computer screen still glowing with lines of code. Her desk neighbor had quietly covered her with a spare jacket and let her sleep. Through her lunch break, the second time Robert found her asleep was the following week. This time she was in the break room, slumped in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs. A half-eaten sandwich still in its wrapper on the table in front of her. He'd watched her for a moment, noticing how exhausted she looked even in sleep. The worry lines on her forehead didn't disappear, and her breathing seemed somehow heavy. Like sleep itself was just another task she had to push through. Robert had wanted to wake her, to ask if everything was okay, but something held him back. Maybe it was that professional boundary he'd always maintained. Maybe it was the fear of overstepping. Or maybe, if he was honest with himself, it was easier not to know. Easier not to get involved in whatever personal crisis was clearly consuming her life. Outside these office walls, but he couldn't stop noticing things. Jennifer had always been meticulous about her appearance. Nothing fancy, but always put together, professional. Now her clothes seemed to hang on her differently, like she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Her shoes were worn down at the heels. There was a small tear in the seam of her blazer that she'd tried to mend with mismatched thread. These were the kinds of details that most people wouldn't notice. But Robert had built his career on paying attention to details. Her work quality hadn't suffered, though. That was perhaps the most remarkable thing. Despite whatever was clearly happening in her personal life, every project she touched was flawless. Every deadline was met. In fact, she'd volunteered to take on extra work when another developer had quit suddenly last month. Her manager had mentioned it in passing during a meeting, praising her dedication, but Robert saw something different. He saw someone drowning but refusing to let go of the life preserver of her job. It was a Thursday evening when Robert made the decision that would change everything. He was packing up his office, getting ready for another quiet evening at home. When he glanced out his window overlooking the parking lot, Jennifer was practically running toward her old sedan, her movements urgent in a way he'd never seen before. She wasn't just tired. She was desperate. Most employees trickled out between 6 and 8 in the evening. Jennifer used to be one of the 8 o'clock crowd. But for the past few weeks, she'd been leaving at exactly 6, the moment her shift officially ended. She'd pack up her things with shaking hands and bolt for the door like someone who had somewhere critical to be. Robert stood at his window, watching her fumble with her car keys, drop them, pick them up, and finally get the door open. Something in her urgency struck a chord of genuine concern in him. This wasn't just about work-life balance. This was about survival. He could feel it. Before he could talk himself out of it, Robert grabbed his own keys and headed for the parking lot. His conscience was already arguing with him. This was wrong. This was an invasion of privacy. This was exactly the kind of thing that could get him into serious trouble. But there was a louder voice in his head. One that said, sometimes you have to break the rules to do what's right. He kept his distance, staying several cars back as Jennifer pulled out of the parking lot and headed east. His expensive car felt suddenly obscene as he followed her older vehicle through traffic. The contrast between their lives had never been more obvious. While he lived in the suburbs, in a house with more rooms than he needed, Jennifer was leading him somewhere he'd never been, the industrial district. That's where she was heading. Robert felt his stomach tighten as the neighborhoods changed. The businesses became smaller, more run down. The apartment buildings grew older, their paint peeling, their parking lots cracked and potholed. This wasn't where he'd imagined any of his employees living. This was the part of the city he drove through quickly on his way to somewhere else. Jennifer pulled into the parking lot of a 3-story apartment complex that had seen better days, probably several decades ago. The brick was dark with age and pollution. Several windows were covered with blankets instead of curtains. The front steps had a metal railing that was rusted in places. Robert parked across the street, far enough away to not be obvious but close enough to see. He watched as Jennifer got out of her car, grabbed what looked like her laptop bag and several plastic grocery bags from the trunk. Where had she gotten groceries? She must have picked them up during her lunch break. The same lunch break where he'd found her sleeping. Then she did something that surprised him. She ran. Actually ran toward the building, those worn-out shoes slapping against the concrete, at the grocery bags swinging from her arms. This wasn't someone coming home from work. This was someone responding to an emergency. Robert sat in his car, engine idling, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Every rational part of his brain was screaming at him to leave, to go home to his comfortable house, his comfortable life, his comfortable ignorance. He could check on Jennifer at work tomorrow. He could ask her manager to have a welfare check. He could handle this through proper channels, but he didn't leave. Instead, he turned off his engine and sat there in the gathering dusk, watching the light flicker on in a ground-floor apartment. And what he was about to see through that partially covered window would shake everything he thought he knew about the people who worked for him. Robert sat in his car for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes. The street was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and a dog barking somewhere nearby. The apartment building looked even more worn up close than it had from a distance. Paint peeled from the window frames, and the concrete steps leading to the entrance had cracks running through them like spider webs. He knew he should leave. This was crossing every professional line he'd ever drawn for himself. But something kept him there. Some instinct that told him Jennifer needed help, whether she'd asked for it or not. Finally, he got out of his car and walked slowly toward the building, trying to look casual. It's like he belonged there. The ground-floor apartment where Jennifer had disappeared had a window facing the parking lot. The blinds were old and bent, hanging at odd angles, and they didn't quite close all the way. Robert knew what he was doing was wrong, but he couldn't seem to stop himself. He moved closer, staying in the shadows, until he could see inside. What he saw made him freeze in place. Jennifer wasn't alone, not even close. The small apartment was filled with children. Robert counted 4 of them, ranging from maybe 5 years old to somewhere around 13 or 14. But it wasn't just the number of children that shocked him. It was what they needed. The youngest child, a little girl with dark curls, was in a wheelchair. The specialized kind that Robert recognized because his own company had once developed software for a medical equipment manufacturer. That chair probably cost more than Jennifer made in several months. The little girl's legs were thin and bent at unusual angles, and she wore braces on both of them. One of the older boys, maybe 9 or 10, had visible physical challenges too. His movements were stiff and awkward as he tried to reach for something on a low table. Robert watched as Jennifer immediately moved to help him, her exhaustion seeming to disappear the moment she stepped into that apartment. But she didn't stop there. Jennifer moved around the small space like she was running a marathon. She knelt beside the little girl in the wheelchair and began what looked like physical therapy exercises. Gently moving the child's legs through careful stretches, the little girl's face scrunched up in discomfort. But Jennifer kept talking to her, encouraging her, making her smile even through what was obviously pain at the same time. She was helping another child with homework. A boy who looked about 12 sat at a small folding table, his notebook open, clearly frustrated with whatever problem he was working on. Jennifer would do a few stretches with the little girl, then lean over to help the boy with his math, then back to the stretches, back to the homework. Over and over, and there was more. In the corner of the living room, in an old recliner that had seen better days, sat an elderly woman. She looked frail and confused, her eyes unfocused, staring at the wall. Every few minutes, she'd call out something unclear. Jennifer would respond gently while continuing to juggle everything else. The apartment itself told its own story. It was clean, spotlessly so, but it was tiny. Robert could see most of it from his position by the window. The living room doubled as someone's bedroom, with a mattress against one wall. Medical supplies were everywhere. There was an oxygen tank near the elderly woman's chair. Prescription bottles lined a shelf that had been turned into a makeshift medicine cabinet. A walker stood folded in the corner. Various pieces of medical equipment that Robert couldn't even name were stacked neatly wherever there was space. The furniture was old and mismatched. The kind of stuff people get from thrift stores or find on the curb. But everything was arranged with care. There were children's drawings taped to the walls. A small bookshelf held worn library books. Someone had tried to make this place a home. Even though it clearly wasn't enough space for so many people with so many needs, Robert watched as the oldest child, a teenage girl, emerged from what must have been the bedroom. She looked tired too, almost as tired as Jennifer. She said something to her mother, and even though Robert couldn't hear the words, he could see the concern on her face. Jennifer shook her head, smiled, said something that made the girl relax a little. Then Jennifer moved to the kitchen area, which was barely separated from the living room by a short counter. She started unpacking those grocery bags she'd carried in, moving fast, pulling out pasta and sauce and frozen vegetables. The cheapest brands, Robert noticed. The kind he hadn't bought in years, not since he was fresh out of college and counting every penny. She put water on to boil and immediately turned to the little girl in the wheelchair. This time she was doing something with a feeding tube. Robert felt his chest tighten as he realized the child couldn't eat normally. Jennifer worked with practiced efficiency, checking the equipment, measuring out liquid nutrition, connecting tubes with the kind of casual expertise that only comes from doing something hundreds of times while that was running. She helped the boy with the physical challenges take his medication. There were so many pills. She counted them out carefully, checked them twice, made sure he swallowed each one with water. Then she was back in the kitchen, stirring the pasta, checking the clock. Rushing. The older girl tried to help, taking over the homework supervision while Jennifer cooked. But even she looked overwhelmed. This was a child trying to do adult work, trying to help her mother carry a load that was clearly too heavy for any one person, let alone a family already struggling. Robert's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his wife asking what time he'd be home for dinner. They had reservations at that new Italian place downtown. The one where appetizers cost more than Jennifer, probably spent on groceries for her entire family for a week. He looked at his phone, then back through the window. Jennifer had collapsed into a chair for just a moment, her head in her hands. Just 30 seconds of rest before the water boiled over and she jumped up again. Turning down the heat, draining the pasta, mixing in the sauce. The teenage girl was setting out mismatched plates and cups. The boy with physical challenges was trying to help his younger siblings get settled at the table, and the elderly woman in the corner called out again. Something confused and worried, and Jennifer went to her immediately. She knelt beside the chair, took the woman's hand, spoke softly to her. The woman's face relaxed. This was her mother, Robert realized. It had to be. Jennifer was taking care of her own mother, along with all these children. Robert backed away from the window slowly, his mind reeling. He returned to his car and sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. For 2 hours, he couldn't bring himself to leave. He just sat there, watching that window, watching Jennifer move from task to task without stopping. Dinner, medication, more physical therapy, baths, bedtime routines. It never ended. When he finally drove away, his reservation, long missed. His wife's texts growing more concerned, Robert couldn't stop seeing Jennifer's face. The exhaustion, the determination, the love. She wasn't just surviving. She was fighting a war every single day. She was doing it completely alone. And tomorrow, she'd wake up at dawn and come to work and pretend everything was fine. Robert didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that tiny apartment. He saw Jennifer moving from one crisis to the next, never resting, never stopping. He saw the little girl in the wheelchair, the confused elderly woman, the teenage daughter trying so hard to help. By the time morning came, he'd made a decision. He needed to understand the full picture. He arrived at the office earlier than usual, before most employees had even started their commute. The building was quiet, almost peaceful in the early morning light. Robert went straight to his office and did something he'd never done in his 12 years as CEO. He called down to Human Resources and asked them to send him Jennifer's complete employee file. 20 minutes later, it arrived in his email. Robert opened it with hands that weren't quite steady. What he found over the next hour made his stomach twist into knots. Jennifer had joined the company 6 years ago. Back then, her address had been in a nice suburban neighborhood, the kind of place with good schools and tree-lined streets. Her emergency contact had listed a husband's name. She'd signed up for the premium health insurance package, the one that covered everything. Her performance reviews from those first 2 years were glowing. She'd even won an Employee of the Year award. But then, 4 years ago, everything changed. Her address changed first, moving to a slightly smaller place in a less expensive area. Then her emergency contact changed. The husband's name was crossed out, replaced with 4 other names. All children, Robert realized, looking at the ages listed. Her health insurance was downgraded to the basic package, the bare minimum the company offered. 2 years after that, another address change. This time to the apartment building Robert had seen last night, and her emergency contacts expanded to include an elderly woman. The benefits package was downgraded again, this time to the absolute cheapest option available. Jennifer had checked boxes to decline dental coverage, vision coverage, the supplemental life insurance. Everything that cost extra money she'd refuse. Robert pulled up her time card history next. The pattern was striking. For the past 2 years, Jennifer had arrived at exactly 7 in the morning and left at exactly 6 in the evening. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. She'd used only 3 sick days in 2 years, and those were marked as half days. Her vacation time told an even more depressing story. She'd accumulated weeks of unused vacation, whenever the company policy allowed it. She'd sold those days back for cash. There was a note in her file from 8 months ago. Jennifer had been offered a promotion to senior developer, a position that would have meant a significant raise. But it would have also required occasional travel to client sites and some evening meetings. She'd turned it down. The note from her manager expressed confusion. It wasn't like Jennifer to refuse advancement. Robert sat back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. He pulled up the company's insurance records next. This required a special access request, but as CEO, he had the authority. What he found there broke his heart completely. Jennifer had submitted claims for her children. Lots of claims. Physical therapy appointments, specialist visits, medical equipment, prescriptions. But because she'd chosen the cheapest insurance plan, she was paying huge portions out of pocket. The copays alone would have been crushing for someone at her salary level, and those were just for the things. Insurance partially covered. There was a memo from the benefits coordinator from 3 years ago, suggesting Jennifer might qualify for additional support programs. It had been sent to her work email. She'd never responded. Robert understood why now. Jennifer was too proud to ask for help, or maybe too scared that asking would somehow put her job at risk. He opened his door and called for David, Jennifer's direct supervisor. David arrived looking curious and slightly nervous. Being summoned to the CEO's office first thing in the morning wasn't usually a good sign. "Sit down, David," Robert said, trying to keep his voice casual. "I want to talk about Jennifer Mitchell. How's she doing?" David's face immediately brightened. "Oh, she's fantastic. Honestly, she's one of my best developers. Never complains. Always delivers quality work. She actually just volunteered to take on the Patterson account after Steve quit last month. That project was a nightmare, but she turned it around in 2 weeks, and personally." Robert asked, "How does she seem to you?" David shrugged. "She's quiet. Keeps to herself mostly. She looks tired lately, but who isn't tired, right? We're in a demanding industry. She handles it well, though. Very professional. Robert felt a flash of frustration. How could David not see what was happening right in front of him? But then again, Robert himself had only noticed because he'd literally followed Jennifer home. How many other employees were suffering in silence and nobody knew? Has she asked for any accommodations? Any flexibility with her schedule? No, nothing like that. She's actually asked for more overtime lately. Said she could use the extra money. David paused. Is something wrong? Is Jennifer okay? Robert chose his words carefully. I'm just doing some check-ins with department heads about team well-being. Thanks, David. That's all I needed. After David left, Robert spent another hour digging through records. He looked at Jennifer's salary history. She'd received the standard annual raises, but they were small. Cost of living increases, nothing more. She'd never asked for a raise, never negotiated. Just accepted whatever was offered and worked harder than everyone around her. He pulled up her project history next. Over the past 2 years, Jennifer had completed more projects than any other developer in her department. Not just more projects, better projects. Her code was clean, efficient, well documented. Other developers often asked her for help. She'd become the unofficial mentor for new hires, teaching them the systems while juggling her own massive workload. And she'd done all of this while living the life Robert had witnessed last night. While caring for 4 children, 2 of them with serious medical needs. While taking care of an elderly mother who could barely recognize her own surroundings. While surviving on maybe 4 hours of sleep a night, Robert looked around his corner office with its view of the city's skyline. His desk was solid mahogany. The chairs were Italian leather. There was a private bathroom attached, complete with a shower for those rare nights he worked late. His coffee machine was imported from Switzerland and cost more than Jennifer, probably paid in rent for a month. The contrast made him feel physically ill. His phone rang. His assistant reminding him about the board meeting in an hour. They'd be discussing quarterly profits, executive bonuses, the planned expansion into 2 new markets. Robert had been excited about that meeting yesterday. Now, it felt obscene. He opened his laptop and started making notes. But these weren't notes for the board meeting. These were notes about Jennifer. About what she needed. About what the company should have been providing all along. About how many other employees might be drowning just like her. Too proud or too scared to ask for help, Robert had built his company on innovation. On being ahead of the curve. On treating technology like it was the answer to everything. But he'd forgotten the most important thing. His company wasn't about code or products or market share. It was about people. Real people with real lives and real problems. And he'd been so busy looking at spreadsheets and profit margins that he'd completely missed the fact that one of his best employees was barely surviving. The realization hit him hard. How many others was he missing? How many people came to work every day, put on a professional face, and then went home to situations he couldn't even imagine? He picked up his phone and made a call. Not to his assistant, or his board members, or his executives. He called the head of human resources directly. Karen, it's Robert. Clear my schedule for today. We need to talk about how we support our employees. And I mean really support them. Robert spent the entire weekend thinking about how to approach Jennifer. He couldn't just ignore what he'd seen, but he also couldn't let her know he'd followed her home and watched through her window. That would be creepy at best, and potentially illegal at worst. He needed to handle this carefully, with dignity for both of them. Monday morning came too quickly. Robert arrived at the office with his stomach in knots. He'd rehearsed what he was going to say a dozen times, but none of it sounded right. Finally, at 10 o'clock, he asked his assistant to call Jennifer up to his office. The look on Jennifer's face when she got the message must have been something, because when she arrived 15 minutes later, she was pale as a ghost. Her hands were shaking slightly as she knocked on his door. Come in, Jennifer. Please, sit down. Robert tried to sound warm and friendly, but he could see the fear in her eyes. Employees didn't get called to the CEO's office for good reasons, not usually. Jennifer sat on the edge of the chair, her posture rigid, her laptop bag clutched in her lap like a shield. She looked even more exhausted up close than she had from a distance. The dark circles under her eyes were so pronounced they looked like bruises. Her blazer, the one with the mended seam, hung loose on her frame. "Am I being let go?" The words came out in a whisper, and Robert could hear the panic underneath them. "No, God, no." "Jennifer, you're not in any trouble? I promise you that." He saw her shoulders relax just slightly, but the fear didn't leave her eyes. "I wanted to talk to you because I've noticed you seem exhausted lately and I'm concerned." Jennifer's face flushed red. "I'm so sorry. I know I fell asleep at my desk those times. It won't happen again. I've been working on managing my time better, and I promise my work quality hasn't suffered. I can show you my recent projects, Jennifer." "Stop." Robert held up his hand gently. "Your work is excellent. That's not what this is about." He took a deep breath. "This was the hard part. I'm going to be honest with you about something, and I need you to hear me out before you react, okay?" She nodded, her knuckles white from gripping her bag. "Last Thursday evening, I saw you leaving work and you looked so exhausted and rushed that I got worried. So I followed you home." He saw her eyes go wide, saw her start to speak, but he continued quickly. "I know that was wrong. I know it was an invasion of your privacy. But I needed to understand what was happening because I was genuinely concerned about you." Jennifer's face went from pale to red and back to pale again. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "I saw your apartment through the window. I saw your children, your mother. I saw what you're dealing with every single day." Robert's voice was gentle but firm. "And I need you to understand something. You are not in trouble. You haven't done anything wrong. But I think we as a company, as your employer, have failed you. And I want to fix that." The tears started then, sliding down Jennifer's cheeks before she could stop them. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Robert grabbed the box of tissues from his desk and moved it closer to her, then sat back down and waited. He'd learned a long time ago that sometimes people just needed to cry. When she finally looked up, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Please don't fire me. I know I should have disclosed some things. I know I took home some office supplies once when I couldn't afford the medical tape, but I replaced everything. I just need this job. My kids need me. My mother needs me. I can work harder, I can, Jennifer. Stop. Please." Robert leaned forward, his voice firm but kind. "You're not listening to me. You're one of our best employees. I'm not firing you. I'm trying to help you. But I need you to be honest with me about what's going on. Can you do that?" She stared at him for a long moment, like she was trying to decide if this was real or some kind of trap. Finally, she nodded. "Tell me about your family." It all came pouring out. The story Robert had pieced together from files and observation became real and raw and devastating. Jennifer's husband had died in a car accident 4 years ago. He'd been driving home from a business trip when a drunk driver crossed the center line. Her youngest daughter had been in the car with him. The little girl had survived, but her spine had been damaged. She'd never walk again. The medical bills had come immediately. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, even after insurance. Jennifer had sold their house, moved to a smaller place, used up every penny of savings. But it wasn't enough. Her son had been born with cerebral palsy, and he needed ongoing therapy and medication that insurance only partially covered. Then her mother had a stroke 2 years ago, and suddenly, Jennifer was caring for her too. "I work here all day. Then I go home, and I'm a nurse, a physical therapist, a caregiver. A mother," Jennifer said, wiping her eyes. "I sleep maybe 3 or 4 hours a night. I know I look terrible. I know I'm not the employee I used to be. But I'm trying so hard. I need the money. The medical bills never stop coming. The rent is due every month. The kids need food and clothes, and their medications cost more than groceries." She looked down at her hands. "I turned down that promotion because I couldn't travel. I can't leave my kids overnight. My oldest daughter, she's only 14, and she already does so much to help. But I can't put more on her. She deserves to be a kid, not a second parent." Robert felt his throat tighten. "Why didn't you ask for help? Why didn't you come to HR? Jennifer laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "And say what?" That I'm barely holding it together? That I need special treatment? I was afraid you'd think I couldn't handle the job anymore. I was afraid I'd lose the one thing keeping my family afloat. She looked up at him, her eyes red and exhausted. Do you know what happens if I lose this job? We lose our apartment. We lose access to the kids' doctors. My daughter loses her wheelchair access. Everything falls apart. The weight of that responsibility hung in the air between them. Robert thought about his own life, his comfortable home, his healthy family. He thought about how he'd complained last week that his son's private school tuition had gone up. The tuition for 1 year probably cost more than Jennifer made in total. You're not going to lose your job, Robert said firmly. But things are going to change. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Jennifer looked skeptical, like she'd been disappointed too many times to believe in easy fixes. But she nodded slowly. First thing, I'm connecting you with our benefits coordinator. We're going to upgrade your insurance to the premium plan, and the company is going to cover the difference in cost. I don't want you to argue about this. It's not negotiable. I can't afford you're not hearing me. The company is covering it. This is on us, not you. Robert pulled out a notepad and started writing. Second, I'm approving a flexible work schedule for you. 3 days a week, you can work from home. The other 2 days, you can come in late and leave early if you need to. We'll work around your family's needs. Jennifer's mouth fell open. But the projects will get done because you're excellent at your job. Jennifer, you've been doing the work of 2 people while running on empty. Imagine what you could do if you actually had support. He kept writing. Third, I'm connecting you with a social worker who specializes in helping families access resources. There are programs for children with disabilities, assistance for caregivers. You shouldn't be navigating this alone. I don't know what to say, Jennifer's voice broke. You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you'll accept the help. She nodded, tears streaming down her face again. But this time Robert thought they might be different kinds of tears. 3 months had passed since that conversation in Robert's office, and the transformation had been nothing short of remarkable. But it hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. Robert had learned that helping someone meant more than just writing checks and making promises. It meant following through day after day, even when it was complicated. The first week after their meeting, Robert had personally walked Jennifer down to the benefits office. He'd sat with her while the coordinator explained the upgraded insurance plan, made sure she understood every benefit available to her. The relief on Jennifer's face when she realized her daughter's physical therapy would now be fully covered had been worth every penny. The flexible work schedule had taken some adjusting. Jennifer had been terrified at first, convinced that working from home would somehow make her less valuable to the company. But Robert had made it clear to her entire department that this was a permanent arrangement, not a temporary accommodation. Within weeks, her productivity had actually increased. Turned out that a person who got 6 hours of sleep instead of 4 could actually think more clearly. But Robert hadn't stopped there. That conversation with Jennifer had opened his eyes to something bigger, something he couldn't ignore. If Jennifer had been struggling in silence, how many others were doing the same thing? How many employees were one emergency away from losing everything? He'd called a meeting with his entire leadership team 2 weeks after talking to Jennifer. Around that conference table sat people who'd been with him for years. People he trusted, people who helped build the company. And he'd told them everything. Not Jennifer's name, not her specific situation, but what he'd learned about the gap between what they thought they were providing and what employees actually needed. The reaction had been mixed. Some executives got it immediately. Others worried about costs, about setting precedents, about employees taking advantage. Robert had listened to all of it, and then he'd made a decision. They were going to do better, period. That's how the employee support program was born. It started simple. An emergency fund for employees facing unexpected hardships. Extended caregiving leave beyond what the law required. Partnerships with local healthcare providers to offer discounted services. A confidential helpline where employees could ask for help without fear of judgment or consequences. But the real work was changing the culture. Robert started having regular town halls where he talked openly about work-life balance, about asking for help, about the fact that everyone had a life outside these office walls. He trained managers to look for signs of employee distress, to check in regularly, to actually care about the people they supervised. Not everyone believed it at first. Years of corporate speak had made people skeptical, but slowly, carefully, employees started coming forward. A single father struggling with childcare, a woman caring for a partner with cancer, a young man whose student loan debt was drowning him. Each story broke Robert's heart a little more, and each one reinforced that this program wasn't just nice to have. It was essential. Jennifer became an unexpected advocate for the program, though she never shared her own story publicly. She'd quietly mention it to colleagues who seemed to be struggling. Let them know that help was available, that asking for it wouldn't cost them their jobs. Robert watched her transform from someone barely surviving to someone who could actually breathe again. The change in her was visible to everyone. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. She smiled more. She'd even started joining colleagues for lunch occasionally, something she hadn't had the energy for in years. Her daughter's physical therapy was progressing well with consistent treatment. Her son's medication was properly managed. Her mother had been connected with a part-time care aide through one of the programs the social worker had found. For months after their conversation, Robert scheduled a company-wide meeting. The entire staff gathered in the main conference hall, curious and slightly nervous. Company-wide meetings usually meant big announcements. People weren't sure if this would be good news or bad. Robert took the stage and looked out at the sea of faces. Somewhere in that crowd was Jennifer, sitting with her department, looking as curious as everyone else. 4 months ago, Robert began, I learned something that changed how I see this company. I learned that one of our employees, someone who came to work every single day with a smile, someone who never missed a deadline, someone who helped train new hires and took on extra projects, was drowning. And nobody knew. Not her manager, not HR, not me. She was suffering in silence because she was afraid that asking for help would cost her everything. The room was completely silent. Robert could see people glancing at each other, wondering. I'm not going to share this person's name or story because that's private, but what I am going to share is what I learned from her situation. We built this company on innovation and excellence, but we forgot something crucial. We're not just a collection of employees. We're human beings with families, with struggles, with lives that don't stop just because we leave the office. He clicked to the next slide, which showed the statistics from the new employee support program. In the past 3 months, 47 of our employees have reached out for help through our new support program. 47 people who were struggling and now have resources. 47 people who might have quit, or burned out, or worse, if we hadn't made these changes. Robert paused, letting that sink in. Some people asked me if this was good business, if investing this much in employee welfare made financial sense. And you know what? I don't care. Because I'd rather have a company that breaks even while treating people with dignity than a company that makes billions while people suffer in silence. The applause started slowly, then built. Robert saw people wiping their eyes, nodding, and some looking relieved, like they'd been carrying their own heavy burdens. But I need to be honest with all of you. This isn't just about the program. It's about culture. It's about creating a place where people feel safe asking for help, where your manager checks in about your well-being, not just your project status, where we treat each other like whole human beings, not just workers. After the meeting ended, Robert made his way through the crowd of employees. People wanted to shake his hand, share their own stories, thank him. It was overwhelming and humbling all at once. Jennifer found him near the back of the room. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at him with tears in her eyes. You know, she finally said, what you did that night, following me home, it was pretty weird. Robert felt his face flush with embarrassment. I know, I'm sorry. It was completely inappropriate, but she interrupted, a small smile playing at her lips. It was also the moment someone finally saw me, really saw me. Not just the employee who showed up and did her job, but the person who was drowning and too scared to call for help. She reached out and squeezed his hand. You gave me my life back. You gave my kids their mom back. My daughter asked me last week why I was singing while I made breakfast. I realized it was because I couldn't remember the last time I'd had the energy to sing. So thank you. For being weird that one time? For caring enough to look past the professional mask we all wear? Robert watched her walk back to her desk, back to her team, back to a life that was still challenging but no longer impossible. He thought about that night outside her apartment, how close he'd come to just driving away, to maintaining his comfortable distance from other people's problems. Sometimes, he realized you have to be willing to be uncomfortable, to cross lines you've drawn for yourself, to really see the people around you. And once you truly see them, once you understand their struggles and their strength, you can never go back to not caring. The view from that car window had changed everything. Not just for Jennifer, but for an entire company. And maybe, just maybe, it had changed Robert too. He'd started the company wanting to innovate and succeed. But now he understood that real success meant building something that made people's lives better, not just their bank accounts bigger. He looked around his office one more time before heading home to his own family. Tomorrow, there would be more work, more challenges, more employees who needed support. But for today, he allowed himself to feel good about the difference they were making. One person at a time, one life at a time. That was enough.